Hey everyone, it's me again, your friend Pat. We're here for another exciting episode of Measuring Dev Skills with CodeSignal. And I have the honor of being joined again by Michael Newman. Michael leads the product engineering team at CodeSignal. And Michael, I'm a big fan of your work. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be back.
Now, in the last episode, we looked at some of the interesting UI features and improvements that were made for creating a custom task. And we got some great feedback from our users. It sounds like they would love to see the actual full process of creating a task. So I was thinking that's something we could do today. Just to get back into the dashboard, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we are. So the last time we sort of looked at a single function task, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for the type we should look at today, Michael.
So I think free front end would be a really great example of a task to look at. Last week, we talked a bit about things that we've been improving over the last year. And I think free front end in particular is an area that we've focused on. So I'm really excited to show off some of the things that we have.
Awesome. So we can get started and just sort of create a simple task here. But while we do that, the way I've kind of described these in the past is that these kinds of tasks serve sort of like in between needs, right? We don't have like a full-on automated set of tests, but at the same time, we don't want something so basic that it's just like a notepad file or something like that. Can you tell us about some of the situations that a tech lead might want to give one of these kinds of tests?
Yeah, I think there are two situations where you want to use this kind of free format task where we don't have automated scoring. One of them is during an interview. Typically during a live coding session, you have the benefit and the luxury of having a human reviewer present at the time that the candidate is writing the code. So it's always, you're able to rate them on dimensions and judge the correctness and get a sense of how they're doing live in real time, and to leave that feedback in your applicant tracking system, of course. So in that case, the automated scoring may not be as important. The other case is if you want to ask them to do something that's more open-ended, like design something that you think looks pretty. If you're maybe interviewing a front-end engineer and you're giving a little bit of leeway in what you're hoping to see. In that case, giving them a bunch of automated tests to code against may a little bit defeat the goal. You may actually want to create something that's more open-ended and just allow it to be manually scored after the fact.
Right. I mean, we always want to be getting a good signal of the candidate's skills, right? So if we restrict it too much, we might not be giving the right opportunity for them to demonstrate that. That makes sense. So I've left this one very open-ended for now. And now I'm just looking at the languages and code because I'm thinking if I want to keep this really simple, I just want a plain old-fashioned HTML, CSS, JavaScript kind of situation. So I think we talked about this last time, the idea of restricting certain languages available. So I'm just going to limit this one. I'm going to get rid of the CSS preprocessors and any other fancy kind of stuff in here. And we're just going to say HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for this one. And basically when I hit save, I mean, we have a task, right? We could go ahead and give this task to a candidate now.
That's right. You certainly could. Of course, the description is very loose here, so maybe this would be appropriate for an interview where you're able to give them some guidance. But they have an HTML file here, they have a CSS file, and they have a JavaScript file. So markup, styling, and scripting. It's all there. What we're trying to do with this task type is find a balance between giving them control, but also not exposing too much. So one thing that we don't want to do that we could have done is just give a full HTML document with all of the, the head and everything that you have to configure. If you want to add a separate style sheet, you have to come link it in. That's possible. It is somewhat realistic for old school web development, but it's not very fun, and it doesn't isolate the skill of like writing markup, writing the script tag. So we want to make sure that we make it really easy to come in and get started. So your markup is rendered right away, as you just saw. Your style sheet, you don't have to manually link that into the markup. And if you write any script code in main.js, of course, that will run right away without you having to add a script tag manually to the HTML document.
Right. So I can see that there's a really high immediacy here, right? We don't need to worry about configuring kind of the more tedious details like the head
right.
and imports and stuff like that, like you mentioned, right? So awesome. I feel like I can dive right into this and just start typing code. As you mentioned, this one is a little bit on the open-ended side. And I kind of want to talk about the realism of it as well, because someone might look at this and think, I don't know when the last time I worked with just basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript was, right? So I
Sure.
want to talk about how we can maybe bring in stuff like libraries, right? Make it a little more sophisticated, a little more realistic to the actual responsibilities of a front-end dev. So in order to do that, basically what I want to do is turn this into a React task.
Mhm.
So let's go ahead and look at our libraries. I notice we have this manage libraries little window over here. And actually, it looks like React is already there available for me, which is great to see. So that makes it simpler for me. I don't need to worry about this. And I can see here, it says these are automatically added to the head. So sort of in line with not having to deal with that kind of stuff manually, right?
Right, exactly.
So basically, if I wasn't too sure about what kind of library I wanted to use here, I could just sort of type it in and it would give us a list of some popular options. But let's say I had a specific one. I knew exactly, let's say exactly where I wanted to import it from or exactly the version that I wanted to use. I can just put it right into custom and then add library. So it seems like we have a lot of freedom for these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, we want to make sure that, we're balancing the convenience of being able to just pull in a library by name. You might know I want jQuery, but not have, the link to jQuery readily accessible. In that case, it's preferable if you can just search for it. So we have a search here that's powered by CDN.js that will just look for the most recent version of a library by name. But if you have a more specific link, something that you might have just wanted to embed, maybe something that isn't hosted on CDN.js for some reason, you can pull that in too, no problem. We have that custom URL that basically corresponds to adding a script tag or a link for JavaScript or for CSS.
Perfect. And I can see that we can reorder these if it turns out there are any issues,
So for
like we
example,
sometimes see in
React
the head tag.
DOM, if you
Right.
put it before React, that actually doesn't work. That will cause errors. So the ordering is important. And if it's important for any of the dependencies you're installing, it's important to be able to easily fix it.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's dive into the actual task that we want to do here. It's not just a nice website. I wanted something that was just maybe one step above the classic you've pressed this button 0 times kind of example that we often see with React. So basically, this is something that's kind of like a calculator, but a lot simpler. So if we look at the preview, this is an image of what we eventually want it to look like. And I guess I should mention how easy that was to just use some markdown here and see what it looks like without having to go and save the task or anything. So I'm just going to paste in the HTML and JavaScript stuff that I had prepared. I'll just go back to our languages and code. I'll go to the JavaScript and hey, what's this symbol all about here?
So that code brackets icon indicates that you've provided some starter code for this task for that language. So in the HTML tab, you're going to see whatever is here as a candidate when you first start the problem. Similarly for JavaScript, we can configure and have configured some starter code. So whenever you start off with JavaScript, we'll make sure to start with this. We could also
Perfect.
do the same for JSX or TypeScript if we wanted to use those as our language of choice to make sure
Right.
that
So
we have
if
something that works in every language.
Right. So, for example, if we're hiring for a role that would involve TypeScript, we probably want to limit the user to write it in TypeScript, right?
Exactly. But also, if we're going to support letting them choose between JavaScript and TypeScript, it's a good idea to make sure there's starter code for both languages. And the nice thing is that you can customize the starter code. So you can provide the JavaScript starter code. You can provide the TypeScript starter code so that there's something that's equitable no matter which language the candidate chooses to
Right.
use.
They have the flexibility to sort of demonstrate their knowledge in whatever they're most comfortable with, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so I mean, I think I'm pretty happy with this task so far. Maybe I'll give it a better name. We'll say binary converter styling. Because really what we're after in this case is we have sort of the functionality all ready to go here, but we want to make sure that the candidate is able to style this stuff. And in
Mhm.
particular, let's say we're looking to see if they're familiar with the library styled components. And we want to see, are they actually going to be able to style these components? So I'm going to save this
Right.
task. And Hey, here it is. Okay, good stuff. So basically, we can see here that our converter is working, but it doesn't really look the way the image has specified that we want it to look. So I'm just going to sort of paste in my styled components code and see if that actually solves the issue. But basically, something I wanted to mention about this is that we have this set up in such a way that basically we're isolating the styling part of this, right? We're trying to test the
Mhm.
candidate to see if they're actually able to style these components the way we want to. And it looks like now, yeah, that's looking good. All the buttons are working. But if we wanted to, we could have switched up this task to make it more about the functionality, for example, right?
That's right. We
So
could. So we have the choice to measure, each different aspect, like the functional part, if it's the script that we're testing, or the styling part, or the markup part.
I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense, right? If we're trying to hire someone for a specific role, we want to know if they can perform the task. We want as little noise as possible. This allows us to really isolate the muscle. So if I wanted to try to isolate a different muscle here, I noticed that I could, instead of just editing this task like we did earlier, I could actually just go ahead and duplicate this task. So now we've got another similar one, but instead this time we'll say functionality. And in terms of the code that we start with, I'll just put in all of the styling for now, and then we could say, let's get rid of some of these values. Let's not give all of this away. Let's get rid of the functions that have been given in the code, and leave it to the candidate to actually make this work, given something that actually starts as something that looks nice. So I don't have a description prepared. I'll just say, make this work for now,
Sure, sure.
and we'll save the task. Nice. Okay, so we can see it. It doesn't do anything. So now basically we have two tasks that we could just immediately give to a candidate. Each of them isolate a different muscle, so to speak, right?
There may be different aspects of front-end development. You may have teams where one person is really doing it all, and then we could be a little bit more loose with this, provide the picture of what it should look like, describe the functionality, and have them do it all. Maybe we have folks who are more into the front-end design part. Maybe for them, we put the functionality in place, but leave the styling to them, or vice versa. We have folks who are more about the functionality side. So there's a chance to tweak this task. Since you can duplicate it, it's really easy to take all of that build and port it over and then make those small tweaks. And it's not limited to tasks that you've created either. You can also duplicate tasks from the library. So if you're able to find front-end tasks that we've built that are part of our standard content library, and you think, this would be a really good question, but I just want to tweak this one thing. Like, I think that should have used a React hook for this thing. You can do that. You can go ahead and duplicate it and make those adjustments.
Kind of like forking a project, I guess, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, just another example of the flexibility we're providing to the users who might want to create a task here. So nice. If we look at our library, we've created two fresh tasks here that are specific to a particular role we want to hire for. Anything else that we didn't cover here that you think is worth mentioning?
I think maybe it's worth talking a little bit about the front end preview and how that works, and maybe looking at looking at what happens when we use a language like TypeScript. Um, I think there are a couple of things that are interesting to call out here, which is one, how are we running TypeScript if we support TypeScript? So if we go to main.js and then change the language, when this actually gets into the browser, right, it has to be running JavaScript because that's what browsers run. They run HTML, they run CSS, and they run JavaScript. But we support other languages, so we have transpilation built in behind the scenes using Babel and other plugins to try to make sure that all of this works. It's subtle, but I think worth calling out. When errors are thrown from TypeScript files, if the line numbers don't match, that can be really annoying if because what the browser is running is JavaScript, but what you wrote was TypeScript. the line numbers don't always match because the source code changes. So we're behind the scenes, we're source mapping the error stacks and making sure that we're able to find the error in the code that you wrote and present that back to you as we keep processing everything that you type and then live previewing it in this panel on the right side.
Very cool. You see, this is why I'm so glad you're here, Michael, because this is the type of thing that could be really hard to appreciate. But I do appreciate that that probably wasn't an easy thing to implement.
It's something that I think is really easy to take for granted in your own just development environment. It's really hard to get this stuff right. I think you JavaScript developers and people who use languages that transpile to JavaScript get so used to living in the future that whenever they're brought back to the present, it's actually really tough to work with. Like everyone's using the latest JavaScript proposal, they're using TypeScript and JSX and all things that actually aren't part of the standard for the language. But you get used to using those things and want to make sure that it's easy to accommodate. So we have to be really careful to make sure that we can do that kind of transpilation. And we do it for CSS too. We support Sass and less. And we do that kind of source mapping and that transpilation as well, while also trying to take care, so that if you write something that's temporarily invalid in the style sheet, we're not breaking the rendering of it, which maybe that's too detailed, but we could go into that if you if you think it's interesting.
Maybe in maybe in a future episode. Yeah, I would love to cover something like that. As for now, I mean, I think we've seen some great examples of how these tools can help developers really pump out a task that isn't going to be too time consuming to set up just perfectly, and at the same time isn't too basic and is actually assessing the things that we're looking for. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining us. It was really exciting to go through the full process of creating a task. I think that'll provide a lot more context to our users and definitely demonstrates how these tools can continue to empower them in creating their own in-between style tasks.
Absolutely.